All right, welcome to fourth grade history. We're going to be taking a look at this map, so that's why you don't see me. I wanted to be able to make sure that you can read these places on the map. This is the Landforms Map, and we did this, if you remember, your skill sheet 21 had many of these in there, so we're just going to be taking a look at the ones that we have learned. Okay, if you look up here at this little green area with some water, what this is called an oasis, okay? So it says it right there, oasis. So we're going, we're looking at these places. So there's the oasis. And can you read what this is, this brown area? Desert, okay? So you've got the desert, an oasis, okay? This says the river mouth. Don't necessarily have to know that one. And then the Gulf is there, and this is a sea. Those are just a couple extra things that you'll learn later. One of the things that you have already looked at was right here, and this area is called what? The valley, okay? And what about up here? The mountain. And then we've got right here, what a lot of mountains consist of what? A mountain range, and that name isn't up here, so that's okay, but we needed to know that. What is the level of the ocean's water? What is that called? Level of the ocean's water is called sea level. And elevation or height above sea level is what? The elevation or the height above sea level is called altitude. All right, so the mountain has an altitude. Even where we live has an altitude, okay? Not an attitude, but an altitude. All right, so I'm going to switch this around and I'm going to quiz you a little bit. All right, so what was it called right here? This area? A desert, right. What about this? Right here. Mountain. Oh, I got my chart too far down. Sorry. That's a mountain. Very good. All right, if you got that, great. What is this in here? The valley, okay? And this little green patch here? Oasis. And then what are these group of called? Mountain range. Okay, the group of mountains called a mountain range. All right. What is this out here? You don't have to know this one yet, but it's good to get a head start. This is your sea. There's a gulf here. This is the mouth of the river. This is called a delta. And so there's lots of places on these landforms, and we're going to be learning more of them as we go. But no, those were the few things that you're going to need to know on the map right now. Okay, I'm going to move you back over, and we'll get into our paper or into the lesson. Okay, I'm getting better at pausing it before I move the computer, so that may help you guys. It's helping me a little bit. I'm gonna get my books back in order. All right, so we're looking at pages 228 to 230, and then you're gonna read them. We had conflict with the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union was what? What was their government like? Communist, right? And we did not like that, and we didn't want the Soviet Union to take over free countries. And even though we had some sort of agreement with them, they didn't follow. That was after World War II that there were many there were agreements that were made, but the communists didn't follow those. They were not. They weren't going to play fair, really. So the conflict between the U.S. and the Soviet Union was known as the Cold War. And I just remembered that you have a quiz 32. So pause this, go take your quiz. When you come back, we're gonna jump into the Cold War. Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Hope you did well with that quiz. The Cold War was that disagreement, that conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union, because the United States wanted to keep the countries free. But the communists wanted to spread and go into as many countries as they could. Eventually, I mean, their goal is to take over the world with this. But there were too many countries that didn't want that. And so, you know, the armies in the Cold War did not fight each other, but they threatened each other to set off atomic bombs. And that's really how that war went. And it was a very long and drawn out conflict, because it was just threatening back and forth. Oh, well, if you do that, we're going to set this off. Oh, okay, well, I'm going to set this off. And it was pretty bad. And to prevent the spread of communism, John F. Kennedy, before him, President Eisenhower strengthened the NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and that was with several Western European nations, Canada, and the United States, and it was to keep the Soviet Union from conquering more free countries. Communism didn't really affect many parts of the world, but it would, kind of like a roaring fire that makes small but dangerous sparks, it sparked communist fire around the world. One of those was in Cuba. Communists took over Cuba in 1959 with the first leader wasn't this man, but he was the second man. Fidel Castro was the second leader of Cuba, and it was a communist dictatorship, and the people of Cuba did not like it. And the United States had agreed to help under the rule of John F. Kennedy, when he was the president, promised to help the Cuban freedom fighters that had escaped and were wanting to go back and take their country back. He promised them that the U.S. would back them up. But at the last minute, he changed his mind. The fighters went to the Bay of Pigs, and they went to overthrow the communist dictator. And when he changed his mind, that battle was awful. Those men and were many of them were killed, or some were probably imprisoned, and it was just awful. But one of the things that happened as a result of that was that communists looked at the United States as weak because we backed out. We didn't go to fight. And so, you know, we were fearful because they were so close to our country. They were just, 90 miles from Florida. And the Soviet Union shipped missiles to Cuba. And this became known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so we knew that we had to take a stand, and President Kennedy took that stand, had a Navy blockade built around Cuba, and then it ended that Cuban Missile Crisis. But about a year later, President Kennedy and his wife Jackie visited Dallas, Texas. They traveled in a motorcade, and he was shot and killed in that, and he was assassinated. And so, you know, we grieved him, but Lyndon B. Johnson, his vice president, took over as president. He did a lot to put out some of these fires that were going, especially in South Vietnam. He sent troops over there, over 500,000 troops, and they were trying to free South Vietnam from North Vietnam, from that communism. And really, they wanted to go into North Vietnam and destroy communism there too, and make the whole country be one whole country again and be free. The conflict became known as the Vietnam War, but Congress did not want to, really didn't give them the ability to do what was necessary. They weren't able to go in and win. So President Richard Nixon was the next president, and he eventually withdrew the troops from South Vietnam, and they came home basically with their head hanging low. They weren't able to win, and it just wasn't a good time. There were other things that happened. Several members of Richard Nixon's cabinet were found guilty of criminal charges, and it looked like Richard Nixon tried to cover it up. And so they were going to remove him from office, and so he decided to resign, and he was the first president to resign from office, and Vice President Gerald Ford became the next president. And so soon all the troops were pulled back from South Vietnam, and the communists gained control of all of it, including Laos and Cambodia. By the end of 1970s, the communists controlled parts of Asia, Europe, Africa, South America, and Central America. The United States seemed to be losing the Cold War, and this was just a really rough time for our nation, because from a standpoint of all the other countries looking on, we weren't a very strong nation. We had come out of some of these world wars as a stronger nation, and we needed to rebuild that strong nation that we had. And so that's some things we're going to be looking at as we continue with that. But go ahead and go back and read pages 228 to 230 just at the comprehension check. Answer these 5 questions on a piece of paper, and then for homework, do CCU 18, page 237, numbers 4 through 11 on paper. And that can all be on the same paper. If you can get that on there neatly, just make sure to label them. All right, and I will see you in the next lesson.